I've run out of some of the hardener activator for the paint that I used to paint this airplane. I spent the day yesterday looking up what I needed and trying to find a place to order it that'll send it to me here. Got that taken care of. I've got some other paint that I used for years, some DAR or Del Star, and that uses an activator for it to make it more of a polyurethane paint than a epoxy. Anyway, I run out of that. The last of that I had got hardened up, so it's unusable, and so I tried to find some of that. I did find a place that has some on eBay, but I don't know whether I can get it shipped here or not. And then I kind of had a little breakdown, kind of getting a little overwhelmed by all the stuff that just keeps going wrong here. Assumed that I could just put all this stuff together to get into this stuff, and I keep finding more and more things that need to be fixed as we go here. So I kind of got to a point where I didn't know what to do next, and I just felt like entering college and finding one of those safe spaces that they have there, going in there and getting a coloring book and starting coloring, or hold one of those little soft cuddly stuffed toys they had. And then I realized that they would never let me into one of those safe places anyway. I'm the kind of guy that they make the safe places to keep people safe from, old white conservative man. So they wouldn't let me in. I just get in there and tell everybody to quit sucking their thumbs and get their shit together and get out and get something done. Buck up. So that made me feel better. Come up here and decided to start working on this flap. And I was going to just start cleaning it up and prime it. So I went over it all with some Scotch-Brite, and I could see there was some dull spots on it that maybe the corrosion had started on it. It wasn't corroded in any place, but there were places where corrosion could start or had started. So we got a bucket of AlumiPrep, AlumiBrite, acid etch, whatever you want to call it, basically phosphoric acid. It's all pre-mixed and everything in water that I use to clean all these parts with. And that does three things. It etches the metal, making it more acceptive to paint. It erodes down or eats down in the bottoms, pits and stuff with the corrosion, and kind of eats it away. And it cleans up any oils or anything like that are on anything. I used paint stripper on here, and the paint stripper is kind of a strong alkaline. Acid etch is an acid. I was hoping maybe that would kind of counteract the paint stripper a little bit if there was any paint stripper left anywhere. I washed that down good with water to clean the paint stripper off, but there's a chance that you get some down in a crack or crevice or someplace, and that stuff will activate again when it gets wet and cause the paint to blister off or cause it to start corroding. AlumiPrep does the same thing. It's got to be washed off completely and get clean, because if it gets dried in there any place, when it gets wet, damp a little bit, it'll activate and it'll start eating into the metal too. Well, anyway, I washed that down with the AlumiPrep, got it good and clean, and then washed it down with some fresh water and washed it off real good. And then I've got a bucket or a tray with some iodine solution in it, and I went over and washed it down with some iodine solution, and then washed it down with fresh water and brought it in here to dry out. And normally what I do after I did that, I try to get that painted as soon as possible after I washed it with the iodine. You don't want it to start corroding at all. You want to get the paint on it right away. But this is a complex shape with a lot of seams and stuff like that, so washing it down, the water gets in there, and I want to make sure and get all the water off of there. A simple part, you can wipe it down, blow dry it, run the heat gun on it or something like that and get it dry. But a part like this, you can get water standing in any of the little cracks and crevices, and it'll show up with a blister later. So I did the same thing with this trailing edge. I went ahead and scrubbed it down with AlumiPrep, and then washed it down with iodine. I've got a cutout for these rib sections here so they can get in, and I've got to cut this thing to length. So I'm going to dig out my Dremel tool with a fiber disc on it and cut this thing down to length and cut out the notches for those things. Once I get that done, get this cut out for those ribs like this old piece is here, then I'll mix up some polyfiber primer, 2-part epoxy primer, and paint everything. Well, once I get it painted, then I'm going to fill all those places where the Bondo came out of there, the body putty came out, and smooth that all out again. And then I'll paint it again, put it all together and paint it again, and then we can start covering it after that. drilled holes here. I marked these off the clearance for these ribs and then drilled a relief hole in these corners, and then I can just go ahead and take this Dremel and cut that out. Got all of those notches cut out of there. Now it's just a matter of deburring these holes, deburring these cuts, and cleaning everything up. I got this trailing edge all notched out, deburred, and fitted up. That looks pretty good. So it's all on there. So now I'll go ahead and mix up the primer and wash this stuff down and get it primed. And I can put it together. Got my primer all mixed up, and it's been sitting here. It's supposed to dwell at least 30 minutes to get the activator and the catalyst to do all its dance and stuff in there to be right. An hour in damp conditions, and since this is cold and damp, an hour isn't going to hurt anything. This is what I've got, is epoxy primer EP420 white high temperature coating polyfiber, and this is the catalyst EP430, and then you reduce that down 50% with E500 epoxy reducer, which is kind of standard for a lot of this stuff, a lot of the epoxies and stuff they have. Got a little bit of this left in this container, probably about a third, maybe a little more. I'm out of the catalyst. I don't know why I always run out of the activator or catalyst or whatever you want to call it before I run out of the prime stuff, because I try to mix that stuff up as close as possible as I can get it to the recommended ratios, and it should wind up with 1 pint, which is this bottle, should mix equally with 1 quart at 2 to 1. And anyway, I never get it done. I've got another quart of this that's green instead of white that somebody gave me, so I've got a little bit more catalyst left there for that stuff. So the paint's mixed up. We'll let it dwell a little bit more, and we'll go squirt some on. We'll get the trailing edge hanging up out here in the outer portion of the shop, and the skeleton for the flap, I washed him down with some DX, I think it is, 330 PPG wash primer. It'll take a little bit for all that to evaporate off, but they're ready to go. Got my air compressor on and the air all set up. My gun's all tuned up and ready to go. So that stuff's ready to get painted as soon as that primer gets catalyzed. I've got a coat of primer on those flap pieces, and I just put 1 coat on, but that's enough because all I wanted to do is protect those pieces where they go together and underneath that body putty when I put it on. I actually got it on a little bit thick over here on this trailing edge on the outside because I was spraying it down in those cutouts and stuff to get that inside of that protected as much as I could. Oh, it's got some runs there, but those will sand off. They're not a big deal. I'll put another coat of that on there after I get everything all together, all the body putty and everything on. I've filled in the little divots and stuff on that leading edge of that flap with the body putty. Oh, I gotta let that set up now and cure to sand down. The first batch of it that I made up, I overdid it with a hardener, and so I kind of made a mess with it. It started hardening up before I could get finished with it. This last little bit here, I didn't use near as much hardener, and it's firming up. Give me a little bit more working time, but it's hardening up now. So anyway, we'll give that a while to set up. Then have to get the sandpaper out and sand it down smooth, and I do have some glazing putty to go over it to fill in any pits or pinholes or anything like that. It only takes about 20 minutes for that stuff to set up enough to sand down, but I let it go quite a bit longer than that actually. While that was setting up, I went down to the hangar and worked on these other controls, the other flap and the ailerons. Finished cleaning all the gookumpucky, all of the peralkatone and grease and stuff off of those controls. Well, anyway, I'll get this sanded down, check it out. I can put the trailing edge on that. Then I can worry about tearing that flap apart to see how bad it is. I mean that aileron. We're going to put this trailing edge on. It goes on with PK screws, and this has already had to treat holes in here twice where the trailing edge has been put on there. Of course, once probably the first time it was built and once when it was rebuilt. So I got to figure out a way to put this new trailing edge on and put holes in there for the PK screws, but I don't want to split these holes that are in here already. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking my little rule and I'm picking a spot in there that's clean of any holes where I can put a new hole, and then I'm just going up on these ribs an inch and making a mark. When I put that trailing edge on there, I can lay the inch mark on there and put a mark on the trailing edge, and I'll know exactly where to drill my holes so that they don't interfere with the ones that are already here. Now that the trailing edge is on there, I push that trailing edge up all the way, and if I lay this rule on there like that, that'll give me right there for my screw. Then I could drill a hole right there and put that screw in, and I know it won't interfere with the hole that's already in there. It won't halfway through in it or something like that. Okay, that trailing edge is back on there. I shouldn't say it's back on there, it's on there for the first time. It's on there with number 4 1/4-inch PK screws, stainless steel truss head. Probably should have put that on with flathead Cherry Max rivets. The only reason these are on here with screws like this now is because that's what they had back when they originally designed this airplane. If they had flathead pop rivets, it would have been put together with that. So there's nothing really structural on this. The fabric holds it all together. This kind of holds its shape and stuff, and what fabric going around it's glued down to it and stuff. But anyway, it's together the way it is. So now I was ready to clean that up and put another coat of a primer on it, and then let it sit for a little while and cover it.